This is the Art of Network Engineering podcast. In this podcast, we'll explore tools, technologies, and talented people. We aim to bring you information that will expand your skill sets and toolbox and share the stories of fellow network engineers. Welcome to the Art of Network Engineering. I am AJ Murray at No Blinky Blinky on the Twitters. And this evening I am joined by Lexi. Lexi, how you doing?
Hey, Jay. I'm doing great. Learned a lot today, so I count that as a win.
Ooh, that's always a win. Anything fun that you're learning about that you can share with us?
I learned about, hang on, let me make sure I've got the word.
Is it radiation again? It's
propulsion.
Radiation again, isn't it?
No, not ionizing radiation this time. I learned about air breathing propulsion is what it's called.
Whoa.
I won't get into it, mostly because I don't know quite enough about it, but I was researching fairings, and then it turned into, the rabbit hole that you go down whenever you're like looking up stuff on Google. Like, wait, what the hell is that word? What's that word? Okay, let me look that up, And so I ended up on air breathing propulsion.
Wow.
So that can be everybody's topic to Google now today.
For what it's worth, you could have told me something random and I would have believed you.
Air breathing propulsion to me sounded like when I say it out loud, it sounds like a made up term, but it is not. So for what that's worth, I learned a little bit about it today.
Learned something new.
Yeah. So that's exciting.
So as we live and breathe and record this episode, it is the Thursday after we released Andy's episode. And I just love the reaction from our fans about your joining the team. I thought that was so cool. So
yeah,
I hope you've been seeing that. I know I've been seeing it.
It's been very touching. It's been very sweet. I don't think I said it enough, guys, the last episode, but I am so incredibly stoked to be here with you. It's such an honor to be able to, talk shop and hang out with y'all every Thursday.
We're incredibly stoked to have you here.
Thank you.
Excellent. Tim Bertino at Tim Bertino. How you doing,
Tim?
Hey,
I'm doing well. It's shaping up to be a pretty exciting 2022 already. It was just announced throughout my company. I've accepted a new position within my existing company. So I'm going from going from my senior network engineer position to a systems architect covering the network and communications teams. So technically starts Monday, but I've kind of been getting pulled into more business level meetings lately and that kind of thing. So it's really exciting. It's where I've been wanting to take my career for a little while now. So ready to go.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Tim. That is fantastic.
What's up with AJ? I got to hear it.
All right. Not a whole lot at the moment. I've been studying for the data center design exam. There's a Pluralsight course I've been working through, so that's been good. Just continuing to work on various projects at work, having some fun there. Got assigned some new projects today, another core switch replacement. I'm doing a core switch on a campus, pair of CAT 9500s, and I'm doing a pair of Nexus switches, data center core as well for the same organization. So that should be fun.
Wow.
Good
fun
times.
Projects.
Yeah, I was interested because you mentioned that recently that you were going to start the data center design track. So that's exciting. I needed to call out the Pluralsight too, because you had turned me on to the enterprise design Pluralsight course to try to get me towards CCNP, and I've been loving that so far. It's been really, really good content.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Y'all are both making me want to
enjoy
take
that for sure.
Pluralsight courses for sure. I haven't experienced Pluralsight yet, but it sounds pretty great. You've been singing its praises.
They're good.
Awesome.
They're good. I will say, some of them can be hit or miss.
Okay.
I have taken some, like this data center design. It's a different author than the guys that do the enterprise design. it's good, but it's not as good as the other one that I took. So, you know,
what was the other one you took? Sorry.
The one that Tim's doing right now, which is the enterprise design. Yeah.
Cool. Yep. All right. Good to know.
Yeah. And now it's time for some wins. Winning in our Discord channel this week is The Complete Noob. I love this name. The Complete Noob passed the AWS CCP. Congratulations. Not really a complete noob anymore now.
Nice.
Justin Miller. Justin Miller passed the AZ-104, the Azure Administrator. Congratulations, Justin.
Awesome.
Timothy McConaughey passed the Aviatrix Certified Engineer Associate. Congratulations. I see Aviatrix certs popping up all over the place lately. I have to go get one of those. This is a cool one. Casey Valdivia. I hope I said that right. I probably didn't. I say names wrong all the time. They got a promotion to OSP Design Engineer, and I had to go look up what OSP meant. That stands for Outside Plant. So like the cabling outside of the building.
Very cool.
Yeah, very cool. So OSP Design Engineer. Congrats, Casey.
My fellow cable guy. He's killing it.
Stephen McNutt passed the ISC2 CCSP, the Certified Cloud Security Professional. It's a mouthful.
Wow.
Serious
Congratulations.
Business.
And Kyle Cleveland passed the AZ-900. That's the Microsoft Azure Fundamentals exam. Congratulations, Kyle.
Very nice.
There are no new Patreons joining us this week, but if you're interested in joining the Patreon program, you can go to patreon.com/artofneteng, and we'll shout you out here as soon as you sign up. And just a friendly reminder, we're still doing our listener survey. So if you have some time, go to the show notes, click the link, and fill it out for us. We could really use the feedback. And there's still time to vote for your favorite content creators in the networking area. You can go to the Cisco IT Blog Awards link in the show notes or the link in the description and vote for your favorites. We would appreciate the vote. Thank you so much.
Vote for me.
Yeah, Andy's in there. I'm in there.
I'm not. You don't have to vote for me.
You're not yet. Maybe,
I'm not shilling for anything today.
All right. Now back to the show. Excellent. Well, I am very excited to introduce our guest this evening. We have the pleasure of interviewing Nick Russo. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Nick, you are all over social media. You do an awful lot of content. You put out courses through Pluralsight, which we were just talking about, funny enough. You have your own blog and website where you host white papers and post a number of other study guides, and you just put a lot out there. So I don't know where we should start with you. And so maybe we just start with, what do you do now?
So these days I am a technical leader at Cisco, and that's a fancy way of saying I'm in a role where I don't have any direct reports. So it's not like a people leadership role, but it's a role where you are doing higher level work. So really equivalent to an architect type job, except my job it's less about high level solution designs and more about optimizing existing technology, automating existing solutions, working through extremely complex problems. Occasionally, I hate this term, but I can't think of a better one, parachuting in to solve dumpster fires. I do that occasionally. But for the most part, it's a senior engineering job with a very broad scope of work to do. And I've been in this role since early 2019. So it's been about 3 years now that I've been doing that.
Wow. So is this a, customer facing kind of professional services role? Do people pay for your time, or is this like part of an account team?
The interesting, so it's not part of an account team, and the role was initially designed to be almost entirely internal. So like an overhead, job, again, like from a billing perspective, much like a manager, basically helping the frontline troops do delivery. But over time, it's turned into kind of a hybrid of billable work for customers, leading complex projects, and doing behind the scenes process improvement work. So just to contrast those, for the past few months, I've been working directly on a very complex customer issue as the lead guy, which is billable time on a large project. But I also do a lot of enablement for new technologies. So automation work, cloud work. I'm responsible, along with several other technical leaders like me, for develop enablement plans and such within Cisco, which is all overhead, to get people who don't have this experience to put them in a position where they are more easily able to transition from being a traditional network engineer only to having competence in cloud or automation or whatever else that they think is going to be suitable for their career paths. So that's a big part of my job as well.
Wow.
You have a huge scope of responsibilities at your job.
Yes and no. I'm responsible for assembling those plans and helping do a little bit of coaching to get people there. But because no one reports to me, if people don't do those things, or if, we fail to meet targets, or if projects that I'm not directly supporting go sideways, it's usually the managers that will feel the wrath. So I'm not saying that I don't get to dodge all responsibility. I'm still a conspirator on a lot of these things that go wrong, but it's not, with that broad scope, there are some areas where I have a really deep touch, like on this project I've been doing for 2 months. If that goes sideways, it's going to be a bad day for me. But on some of the other things, there are, it's like a committee. When there's 30 people involved, whose fault is it? I don't know. No one's or everyone's, right? So the blame and the credit gets shared on some of these things. They're very large, multi-people, complex efforts that involve even sometimes different divisions of the company. So I work in U.S. public sector. We have our own vice president. He has his own profit and loss statement. It's its own, 9-figure business or whatever. But the U.S. public sector isn't the only group of people I have to talk to. There are other theaters that we have to coordinate with. So it can become a very expansive job. And before this, I was more of the, I worked on site for a customer as a senior engineer. I did delivery for that customer. My scope was very focused on them. And even though I did a lot of things for that one customer, I didn't care a whole lot about what was going on in the rest of the company because I didn't have to. So this job was, just like most jobs where you take a higher level promotion of any kind, and Tim, if you haven't experienced this yet, you will very soon, is that your scope is going to widen enormously. And maybe that will be compensated for by a reduction in depth, but oftentimes it never happens. And you just end up with a larger scope of responsibility. And that's usually fair because you're senior and you're getting paid more and the expectations are higher, but it can be kind of a shock if you're not expecting it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Words of wisdom for Tim.
So Nick, are there average sizes or time frames of engagements for you right now, or does it vary?
Yeah, it's weird because initially it was, okay, Nick's here for 4 hours. Let's make the best use of his time and solve this problem. And that's kind of what you would think it would be like. But what it's turned into, I remember, I got a call from our principal engineer. There's only one in the whole division, super sharp guy, good friend. He called me up in February or March of last year. He's like, hey, we have this urgent problem. It's a public school district. They have a huge wireless network. We need some automation done to solve this one thing. I spent, a week writing some code. I delivered it. I presented it and I was done. I was like, great. That's exactly what I would expect. But people came to expect that. And then I started getting pulled into bigger, uglier, longer term projects, which is okay. But over time, the director I work for is like, hey, I need you to go take a step back and go back to wide scope because that's where you add the most value. So there's sometimes a tug of war, and it's not just me. There are other engineers who are just as good, who get pulled in that same direction where project managers or senior engineers on projects want to pull you in because they know that you'll be a big value add. But at the same time, now you're kind of pigeonholed into a project for several months, when in reality, all the other things that you're responsible for or have input into can oftentimes suffer a little bit. So like with most companies, there's a balancing act between, do I focus on this one project and get it out of the dumpster? And how do you even measure that? How do we measure from this project that goes from really bad to just tolerably bad that can be managed by other people, to, when does that happen? What are the exit criteria? And recently, I know I'm blabbing a little bit here, but helped to build a policy within our company, and again, Tim, this might be useful for you, is when do we engage our senior most engineers? So what's the entrance criteria? And then equally important, what's the exit criteria? How do we get those people off the project to put them in their initial roles? So the job is interesting because, like I said, there's an architectural component, there's a leadership component, there's direct delivery, and there's also shaping our corporate governance and how do we engage with people, how do we put people in the right place, and how do we pull them back out to make sure that we don't become myopic on certain problems.
Wow.
That's great. So you actually...
we gotta...
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to ask, I can kind of relate a little bit to what you said about like having to, you had to just like create guidelines basically for how to use your senior engineers more efficiently, basically, right? I mean, that those guidelines weren't there before and people get spread too thin, that kind of environment.
Yeah, it was more prescriptive because it was like, if you want a technical leader, you have to go through this process. And we didn't want to make it so painful that no one would do it, but we also didn't want to make it so easy that everyone would do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so we want it to be,
absolutely.
you need to go through your director. Here's the form. It's not that hard. Talk about what your problem is, the skills that you need, why you think you need it, and also clearly define what the exit criteria are. It's like, okay, we get to the point where, for example, I was helping a large US city do migrations, and they were at a point where they were doing everything by hand. I do some automation that helps. We get other people trained up. And once we had other people trained up and an automated process and a clear flow of how we were going to do migrations, I was able to leave the project about 6 weeks later because we met the exit criteria. And if we hadn't specified that criteria, I would have never been able to leave. I may have, but it would have required a high level fight between senior bosses at Cisco, and nobody wants that. So those are examples of how that policy can come into effect and be helpful. And again, these are the things that, architects don't often think about because it's like, okay, yes, you're going to have a wider scope, but how wide? Does it only include architecture? Are you only interfacing with engineers and customers and sales teams and TAC and business units? Or are you also talking to the people managers in your organization and various other stakeholders on the vice president's staff that need to come up with policies for how engineers are engaged on projects and pulled off and all that other stuff that comes with it. So there's the whole aspect of running the company is a big part of it. Now I'm not a bean counter. I don't get pulled into, trying to strengthen our balance sheet. Like that's not my job at all. But at the same time, I do follow how our business operates and how we look on financials, because oftentimes that's going to impact how our division leadership is going to respond to different events. And that usually has a direct impact on the senior engineers in the organization. So there are a lot of things that come with that senior role. And it's more than just being really good at technology. Without sounding pompous, I think I've demonstrated that years ago that I know what I'm talking about. And nobody really challenges that. But all these other new things that are continuously challenging me, they're not really technical. Yes, sometimes I stumble into things I don't know that I find hard. But the harder thing is, how do we govern this technical organization, this $100 million or $1 billion business, to remain profitable at a time when Cisco, where I work, is undergoing a very rapid transformation? Most of you know that we're trying to do a lot more with software now. You might remember we had product announcements. I think it was 2019 or maybe 2020, where every single product that was announced was software except for one. And that was when Chuck Robbins did his kind of traditional product announcements. Everything was software except for one thing. And not only is that, a clear signal about the direction of Cisco in particular, but with that change, it's more than just product development. There's an entire ecosystem of support that has to change to meet that need. And we're kind of in the storm of it, for lack of a better term.
So you touched on something a minute ago where you talked about how important it was to set expectations and set those guidelines. Now, from a person standpoint, do you think that's more on the architect or the engineer themselves, or do they need to lean on management to do that? What makes sense?
I think it has to be kind of a mix, because as an individual, you need to be flexible, but also stand your ground a little bit. Again, there's no hard answers on these things. You need to use your judgment. Like today's a good example. We received a completely ridiculous, unsupportable, and unfair request from a customer. And the PM called me, and we were in complete agreement about how we were going to respond to that. So we didn't have to drag in anyone else because everyone was kind of aligned on it. But oftentimes, alignment with PMs is not always there, and you need arbitration from a senior manager or something. So we find, at least in Cisco, and I think this is true in most large companies where, one of the benefits, and it may not sound like a benefit, but in my opinion, one of the benefits of a large company is that you do have corporate governance. It's not just a bunch of random people at a startup running around doing their own thing. Is that there's a way to do things. There's a paper trail for things that happen. And that clear process can oftentimes keep you out of hot water. I know it's not cool to say that, it's cool to say go fast and break stuff. Like, okay, cool. We do that sometimes with our product development cycles, and we do it sometimes on, for automation and CI/CD. Like, that's great. That has a place. But when it comes to engaging engineers, assigning resources to projects, delivering on customer commitments, and doing so with high customer satisfaction, you can't go fast and break stuff. That's how you lose trust, and that's how your product sales slump. So here, the real challenge here is, when I go to my boss, he understands my value and he understands where I work best. And if he sees me getting pulled into things that aren't good for me, he'll use his influence to pull me back. And honestly, I think that comes down to a mix of good management and good people management on his part, but also the policies I talked about earlier that help protect the engineers from being consumed on projects like that. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes there are executive overrides or concerns around the business that necessitate a different course of action, but those are rare, as they should be. So I don't know. That was kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully
you answered it. I appreciate that.
Useful.
Nick, we got a good question from one of our Patreons, the Traffic Network. So in the type of work that you do, is this a job where you get called in by either other business units or you get assigned certain projects, or are you able to kind of pick and choose the ones where you feel like you're going to add the most value?
I'd say starting mid last year, my choices became, I used to, is probably the short way of saying that. So through most of 19 and 20, the answer was yes. Through most of 21, the answer was no. And I think that's not because of any, personnel differences or anything like that. I think it's just the nature of the projects that were undertaken. Because obviously we know what happened in 2020 with COVID. And I think, this is my speculation, is that the work being done in 19 and 20, or at least in 19, was mostly business as usual. So I was able to have a lot of flexibility on what I worked on. Sometimes I was assigned to projects, and cool, no problem. And at least through the beginning of 2020, people were still able to execute on the plans that they had. Supply chain, yes, there were problems, but the bullwhip effect had not kind of completed its cycle at that point. So people were still able to complete projects, even though things were remote and happening. A lot of things did manage to stay on track. And plus there was a burst of new business. I remember the whole Zoom explosion. Pretty much every online collaboration product set, including like WebEx, saw a big burst over 2020. And I worked on a lot of WebEx type stuff, even though I'm not even a collaboration guy. So those kinds of things where we're kind of a mix of, I choose to do this because I know it's important for the business, and I've been assigned to do this. Into 21, I think by then, people had been dealing with COVID for a year. The pain of the staffing issues started to show up. People had been, where we had been doing remote support for a year. I think that customers still kept to their same schedules and still had their own challenges. So for example, the city I was working with, even though our support was remote, they still had to put people to different sites. And doing that with COVID restrictions, and not to mention getting access to buildings and timelines and coordinating schedules, that's hard anyway. We've all been through that. And those projects tend to go south a lot faster, because when a customer comes up with a crazy schedule and you try to meet that schedule, even falling back a week or two jeopardizes a lot. So I've gotten pulled into those kinds of projects a few times. And frankly, I needed to be there, or someone like me needed to be there. It's not because the engineers on the project were incapable of doing it. It was because their specific knowledge was around building the architecture and helping implement it. But what this customer really needed was a large-scale, repeatable process for doing this continuously, which screams automation. And sometimes the engineers on the project, despite their skill set, may not have that specific skill set. Other projects I've been brought into, not for my technical skills, but simply for my ability to be a technical leader. I'm a relatively articulate person. Most people think that I'm credible. So for me to be the face of Cisco and speaking to customers, where other engineers may be, they may be brilliant on a keyboard, but they're not quite as comfortable speaking. They don't have the poise, for lack of a better term. Sometimes I've been put in that position to be the spokesperson, which I can do. Okay, that's fine. But I'm not going to do it for 6 months, do it for 6 weeks maybe. So those are the kinds of things that happened. Broadly speaking, though, I do get to choose a lot of the work that I do. And when I do choose an assignment, the vast majority of the time, I have tremendous flexibility on how the implementation goes. It's really rare that I get pulled into a project and get treated like a subcontractor. It does happen once every couple of years. That's just the nature of life sometimes. But broadly speaking, I have a lot of flexibility there.
All right. Very cool. Well, I think from here, I'd like to kind of go back. One of the first questions we like to ask our guests is, what got you into network engineering? Like, what was the start for you?
Yeah. So I went to, my degree is in computer science, and I earned that degree in 2008. And I had very little network skill at the time. Like I knew just like at a basic level, the difference between TCP and UDP. That's really all I knew as a computer programmer. Having done a little bit of data communications programming in school. And after joining the military, I was commissioned as an officer and became a communications guy. And in addition to commanding a platoon of about 55 Marines, I was also the communications officer for an infantry battalion, which is about 600 people. And my job was everything from tactical radios, which aren't terribly technical, to kind of traditional circuit switch network telephony equipment, to packet switch networks, routers and switches and wireless communicate, basically WiMAX links, things like that, SATCOM links, and the maintenance of all that gear as well. We had a repair shop, and how do you fix all your gear? So those were kind of the entities that fell under my command. And when I deployed to Haiti in 2010 and Afghanistan the next year, on those deployments, I started to see that some of the traditional telephone switching technology was being used less and less. And even tactical radios, especially in static positions, was being used less and less. And it was pretty obvious that the direction, and this was, more than 10 years ago, was going towards this new, everything over IP type approach, which, everything, that whole concept is like, of course, everything over IP, right? But, 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't really, at least in the military, that wasn't the norm. So we started to see more of it. And, after working with it for so long, I started to really enjoy it, even though I was terrible. Like my skills were, I could barely subnet. I could do a couple commands on a router, but I thought it was really cool because I saw firsthand how powerful it could be when deployed correctly. And then when I left the military in around Christmas time, 2011, immediately, I did what most people do. I immediately bought like a CCNA book, started studying that. I got a job as a systems engineer at a company in my hometown in Rochester, New York. I did that for a few years, managed to improve my skills there. And then, from that point forward, I became a contractor down here in Maryland, working for the Army. Then a few years later, I joined Cisco, and here I am.
Wow.
That's some impressive scope of work that you were doing in the military. I've heard from a few other people who are also in the Marines, and they also had they got a lot of experience right up front with a bunch of different systems, different types of technologies. It just sounds invaluable to experience as an engineer of any kind, but definitely a network engineer for sure.
Yeah, it was the thing about it is that in my role, it was a pretty hands-off technical role for most people. When you're in charge of 55 people. So think about, who in your corporate job has 55 people under them. It's probably like a director or senior manager.
Yeah.
And that person is probably not in front of keyboards too often, even if they were in the past. So I didn't do, I don't want to pretend like I did a lot because I didn't. I had Marines that were much smarter and more capable with these kinds of things, and I allowed them to do it and just kind of paid attention to what was going on.
You were exposed to it and you had to learn it at some point, right? In order to lead people.
Yeah, kind of. There's, it's kind of like, the exposure was there, the knowing how to do the general design was there, and being able to brief the command on what we were doing and how it supported the operations was there. So in a way, it was kind of like a mix between being a people leader and a platoon commander and also being an architect. But the architecture was much more high level. Like you'd make a management level PowerPoint, and then I would go to my senior Marines and say, this is what we need to execute. How should we do it? And we would talk through a plan, and then other people would implement and test it, because I simply didn't have the knowledge then. But I was exposed enough to it to understand, generally how it worked and the problems it could solve, even though my ability to actually implement this technologies was lacking.
Yeah, like you said earlier, you saw the power of it. So that had to have influenced your view of things. That's pretty cool.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, that's why I did it. I mean, I liked writing code, and I was good at it.
Okay.
But I didn't love it, and I wasn't great at it. I'm still a decent coder, but I'm not great. I still like coding, but I don't love it. I really enjoy doing networking stuff. That's why you'll see, even despite all the automation work that I've done, the vast majority of it is network oriented. Yeah. And yes, even though I have done a few projects that have nothing to do with networking at all, those were more like hobby projects, like things that I enjoyed for another reason. I can't just write code for fun. There has to be a reason for it. And when that reason exists and it's something I care about, then the code comes naturally and it doesn't feel like a chore.
I feel like there's probably a lot of network engineers out there who feel the same way, who may have dabbled in automation here or there and just sort of went, networking is more fun.
Yeah, I think so. I think we may have seen that. I think we've also seen people make hard shifts away from networking. Sure. There's some people I think who started off with networking expertise. They did a little bit of software and they realized that that's where their passion lied, and they made almost full breaks from it. And I think that's great. I'm all for people doing what they want to do in a valuable way. But for me, I think Ivan Popelniak does a really, and I probably said his name wrong, I apologize, but he does a good job of explaining it in a nuanced way, where he says, basically, I've got 30 some years of networking experience. I know this stuff really well, but he's also developing really cool automation tools in support of that knowledge. So he sees it more of an augmentation rather than supplementation. And that's how I look at it too. Because I don't want to, it's not just a matter of sunk cost. Like, it's not like I feel like I spend all this time and money, I need to use it. That's not how it is. I actually enjoy networking a lot. And I'm not willing to allow that to go by the wayside to only do this new thing that's cool. Because the new thing that's cool can support everything I've already learned. It's just another skill set I need to continue managing. It's kind of like, when you go to the gym and do a workout and you find a new exercise you like, there's a good chance you're not going to abandon the other things you were doing, especially if they were working for you. You're just going to do this new thing in addition to your workout, find a way to include it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I look at this as well. Rather than, just abandoning everything I'd done before, continuing to build those skills by using automation to improve it. And this has been useful. I've actually learned more about networking by having that. It's forced me to dig deeper into how certain things work. Just today, for example, a few months ago, I published an MTU discovery tool using Python script, and it got some engagement on Twitter. And today, I gave a deep dive of it internal to my company. And even though I have a pretty good understanding of how all those protocols work, writing software to implement that algorithm forced you to look even deeper to the individual flags and the individual types, stuff that you knew before, but you didn't ever have to, like, the only reason you would know that, an ICMP v4 echo reply is type 0 code 0, you might memorize that for an exam, but it actually matters when you're writing software. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of things that force you to go back to your networking skills, apply that knowledge in service of a real goal, and then the outcome is something that's actually beneficial. I have a really hard time just sitting in the corner and writing code for fun. I hate labs. I find that, let me take that back. Doing labs when you're explicitly studying for a test, I think is fine and somewhat enjoyable. But just sitting in the corner and doing labs, I have a really hard time with that. It's a lot easier for me if I'm solving something that I find interesting.
I feel you. Yeah, absolutely. I love that point that you just made, though, about, using whatever sector you're interested in, whether it's the coding side of things or the networking side of things, use the one you're less interested in maybe to supplement the one that you are interested in. And, you can grow that way. It's not, like you said, it's not a zero-sum game. They can contribute to each other, and that's great. It makes you a stronger, worker, employee, more rounded person in general.
Right. And I know, I have the wherewithal to know that if I tried to go and be like an only network automation guy, I probably wouldn't be very successful. Like, I know that I'm good, but I'm not great. But I am great at networking, and I'm known for it. And I know that I've proven it in my work at Cisco and beyond that this is definitely the career for me. And I can augment that by having knowledge of automation and software. So for me, I'm lucky that I was able to figure this out. And, even through my professional career, I've really, if we go back to when I got commissioned in the military, that was 14 years ago. In those 14 years, only about 18 months of that time was spent in a bad job total. So that's like 10%. So pretty low amount of time, because those jobs were, I was able to get in, determine it wasn't for me, and leave and go to another job that did help me grow pretty quickly. So I was very fortunate to be able to have those opportunities as they came. And even though the jobs I sometimes accepted weren't always what I thought they were, with a few exceptions, they were all worth having because they taught me something about what I wanted my path to be, and I was better able to zero in on it. And so far, I've been happy where I've ended up.
So, Nick, I think we can all agree, to put it extremely lightly, that you're a very high-functioning individual. We've got a question here from Chris Denny, and it's, do you think you being a very driven person is what drew you to the Marines, or do you think being in the Marines made you a very driven person?
It's a little chicken and egg, so it's hard to answer. So keep in mind, when I joined the Marines, I was 18 years old. And I don't think a lot of people at that age, I'm not saying that people at that age can't be really driven and talented, but you're a high school kid. It's not the kind of thing where you're really certain. So I joined the Marines mostly for the challenge of it, I think, and the fact that I just thought it would be something interesting to do. I didn't have a whole lot of, I didn't really care what my job was. I just wanted to do it. I'm not sure what the allure was at the time. It's kind of fuzzy to me. But when I first joined, I was an infantryman. I carried a rocket launcher, like bazooka infantry was my job. So nothing to do with communications at all. So that was, a few years of that. And then obviously I was in college, I was in the reserve. So I was in college at the same time. And, I got commissioned, and then halfway through my initial training, you get to basically, choose your wish list of what jobs you want. And I put communications towards the top. Number one, because I knew no one else wanted it, so it'd be easy to get. And number two, because I was like, well, if my degree is in computer science and I get this job, it'll help me when I leave the military. So even though I was still pretty newly commissioned, I was already thinking about my exit, not because I hated it, but because I wanted to make sure that I picked a job that would allow me to remain technically skilled when I got out. Now, I have other friends who are really smart, had computer science degrees and everything, and they decided to be infantry or artillery officers or tank officers, and that's all cool. But a lot of them now are doing great, but they're in roles, leadership roles, consulting roles. I don't want to say life coach because that's a little bit demeaning, but they're in more management type roles than technical ones. And maybe that's what they wanted to do. I'm sure for a lot of them it was. But for me, I knew that I wanted to be technical when I got out. So I didn't want to choose something that would give me a skill set that would push me towards something non-technical, if that makes sense.
I can think of a few times where, as a network engineer, I wish I had a rocket launcher. So I think those two can.
I was going to say, you were kind of anti-communications before you were communications.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's really heavy and it's really loud. So just keep in mind, there are some drawbacks to that particular weapon system.
Very cool. Very cool. Hey, A1 fans, AJ here for NetAlly. Ever heard of NetAlly? Sure you have. They came from the same group of engineers that brought us network tools from Fluke Networks, NetScout, and now they're NetAlly. They know networking. I'm a network engineer for a partner, and when I go to customers and see they use NetAlly, I know it's going to be so much easier to troubleshoot issues we might run into. The name may have changed to NetAlly, but the way they build tools hasn't changed a bit. They ask, what would a network engineer want to help make their job faster and easier, and then they go build it, just like this Etherscope NXG. NetAlly is here to help. NetAlly, simplicity, visibility, collaboration. Visit netally.com today. Now back to the show. So Nick, I'm aware you are a two-time CCIE and you have your CCDE. So I'd love to explore your CCIE and CCDE journey if you could.
Yeah, so I blogged briefly about this in a CCDE blog from about 4 or 5 years ago. But to briefly summarize, I actually did 3 completely different strategies for all 3 tests. And part of me did that just for the purpose of experimentation. But I also proved that you can do different, you can achieve the same goal different ways. So for the route switch one was my first, I was heavily reliant on one vendor, I&E. I basically followed their, I went through all their learnings multiple times, countless times. I spent every possible dollar you could spend with I&E, thousands worth. Did all that, did very little studying outside of I&E, and managed to pass that way. So that's kind of option one, is the vendor-driven, put all your chips in one basket kind of approach. For the CCIE service provider, there was no content for it. It was a new test. It's also not super popular. The old content was kind of useful. I watched them, I still had an I&E subscription, so I watched some of their older videos, which were, helpful for the core stuff. But there were 40 new topics on the exam blueprint. That's where I wrote my own book. And that was the first book I wrote. Super proud of it. Even 6 years later, still sells. And that was basically me 100% self-study with I read a couple blogs. I didn't really read any books, just self-studying blueprint topics, making up my own topologies, my own labs, and then just writing a book at the same time. I managed to pass the test that way. And also I should mention for route switch, I went to the I&E bootcamp for 2 weeks, which was fun. It was mostly review for me, but it helped build my confidence. So I had a little bit of interaction with people. For SP, I didn't speak to a soul. I didn't know anyone in the world studying for it. I thought I had this, again, kind of a fantasy that I'd be the first person. Kind of silly, but I wasn't, but I was one of the first. But I had this idea that I was the only guy doing it, didn't talk to anyone about it. Nobody helped. It was just 100% me, my own labs, and I passed it. Wow. So 2 completely different, and I'm not saying that's a brag. I'm just trying to illustrate the strategy. 2 completely different approaches. For the CCDE, I took the opposite approach. We had meetings every Saturday from 7 a.m. Eastern to 10, 3-hour meetings. So people in Europe, it was the afternoon for them. We had some people on the West Coast, so like 4 a.m. People would join, and then we would prepare things to talk about. Somebody would be on the hook to present designs or talk about use cases, and we would go through and debate with each other about different things. That was useful. We would also, in our study group, we would sometimes we would pair up in 2s and do extra meetings. We'd go through a scenario separately, then we would come together and debrief and compare our answers and debate with one another. I did that with a few other people. Most of them are at Cisco now, but a few are beyond Cisco. And generally for that exam, I read a number of books. So for route switch, I think I only read the OCG. For SP, I didn't read anything. And for CCDE, I read maybe 3 or 4 books. I don't remember exactly. So again, one approach, vendor driven, one completely by yourself, one very interactive and participatory with other people, all had successful results. So when I tell people that, it's like, I've done it 3 times with 3 different tests, 3 completely different strategies, and they all work. So don't focus so much on, the resources and the labs, and you just gotta do the work. It almost doesn't matter how you do it. Doesn't matter how many people you're talking to. Could be 0, could be 10. Obviously, there's going to be a difference in the test. Like CCDE, that's an exam that I think benefits from more communication than just reading, in my opinion. But we did have one guy who passed on his first attempt the same day I did, and he barely, if ever, participated in our study groups, but he read 20 books and he passed. So he took the hermit approach and it worked. So my point is, that generally speaking, there's the tests, even though you need a strategy, you don't need the strategy. Like, come up with what works for you. But when I say works for you, that's not a license to be lazy. right? Works for you means it actually has to work for you. It can't just be, this is convenient for me, so I'm going to do it. It has to be, this is how I learn best. And this is, compatible with my existing work and family commitments. And it's something that I can commit to for the next 6 to 12 months, because that's what it takes for each of these tests.
I'm curious, do you have a personal preference on which one of those styles you enjoyed the most?
It's hard. The route switch one was, it's interesting because I think it's actually a really hard question. Let me think about it for a minute. I think the SP one was the most motivating because I'd wake up I was writing a book. I was excited about that. So that was motivating. And I also was extremely confident going into that test because who could possibly know more about this than me, right? That was a little bit too cocky and I managed to fail the test the first time. But that was, I'd say that one was enjoyable. The route switch one was a little more mechanical because I was just other people doing labs from a vendor, going through the training. I'd gone to the boot camp, which was a good confidence boost. But it really felt like a grind. And it was my first one too. So there was a lot of stress to just get over the hump. The CCDE, I think, was probably the most enjoyable because not only did I make a whole lot of new friends, but I saw that by talking to other people about design things, there was a lot that I had never considered. And what was interesting about CCDE is that you learn pretty quickly how much you don't know. I mean, that's true for all the tests, but particularly with CCDE, when you're, I remember plain as day, we were going through a scenario and the topic was about some like traffic engineering question with BGP. And one of the options was to use NAT. And I laughed it off as being ridiculously stupid, but it was the right answer. And like 75% of the people got it correct. And I was like, well, maybe maybe I shouldn't be here kind of thing. So it was kind of a wake up for me. It's like, you don't know what you think you know, even with 2 CCIEs and a book published. And that was a good, that opportunity wouldn't have happened if I were sitting in a corner, just studying on my own. Mm-hmm. So I'd say that was the most enjoyable. Obviously, I've got lifelong friendships out of the studying. We had guys you see on Twitter all the time, Daniel Deeb, Malcolm Budin, Mike Ziga, all those guys, Yusuf Al-Fathi, they were all part of it. They were all major contributors. And they all, they're all CCDs now. So that was probably the most enjoyable because I walked away with more than just digits from it.
So when you were going through the service provider exam, was the plan from the beginning to write a book about it? Or is this something you just kind of, because you saw that there wasn't a lot of content available for it, is this an idea you had after you started?
It was these things are rarely sequential. They intertwine in weird ways. It's like, you're like, okay, there's no content, so I'll start learning it. But what if I wrote a book on this? Okay, well, let me write it. Let me start taking notes on this thing. And it just kind of built up into that over time. Broadly, I would say, it was a mix of seeing a market opportunity for it, but it was also, but even before I got really serious about the test, I needed to learn a lot of those things for a work project. And it got to the point, and this was, it was false, but it got to the point where I was like, okay, well, I've already learned all this new SP stuff. There's only a couple more topics and I'll be ready for the test. 8 months later, I'm still writing the book. But yeah, it was an enormous, extraordinary effort. I mean, there's almost 1 million words in the thing. Huge effort. So that was, it was tough, but once I got going, it was one of those things like it never seems like it's going to end. Never. I mean, it was 3,000 pages. And now imagine how many pages you have to write every day to finish that. And I did it in 6 months. So it was an extraordinary effort. I don't think I could do it today. I'm too old. I'm too tired. I've got too many other commitments. I couldn't do it today.
Yeah, here we go.
I couldn't do it today. Go ahead.
What's the title of the book?
It's got like a long bureaucratic title. It's like CCIE Service Provider Version 4 Comprehensive Study Guide, something like that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's hard to miss. Sure. Aside from that, it was nobody's done it. I can do it. Even if I'm not the first, I'll be one of the first to pass it. And I'm going to wait until I pass to publish the book because that's going to give the credibility to it. That was like the biggest thing. And even though I finished the book right around Christmas of 15, I didn't pass the test until March of 16. So during that period, and I had to, just a little bit of trivia. I started working at Cisco in early January, and I had to have the book done before I joined the company to avoid any issues with copyright and intellectual property.
Okay.
So I took 3 weeks of 3 weeks of vacation over Christmas, and it took me that long to read the book cover to cover. Made corrections, got it published. Well, I technically didn't have time to publish it. I wish that I had. That's a different story for another time. But I did the old post office trick where I mailed copies of it to myself on a CD. So I have the official reception stamp. So if it ever came to arbitration in the courts, I could say, here's a copy of the book, unchanged, dated the day before I started at Cisco, in case there were any disputes. Now, fortunately, that didn't happen. There were no disputes. But just FYI, that's a trick that that you can do to protect yourself. But I did get approval to publish the book a few months later, and then did so once all the paperwork got done for it. But it sold, like, I remember in the early days, it would sell, 2, 3, 4 copies a day. And that's just extraordinary. I'll be lucky if it sells two a month now. But back then, it was the only thing. About a year or so later, a couple of my friends from Poland, also brilliant guys, they published a workbook. And you may have noticed that we actually decided to team up. So, now we have a bundle that you can get both at a reduced price rather than compete. Now that seems a little bit monopolistic, but considering the price is low and we didn't gouge anyone, we don't really feel bad about it. And it sells really well. So
fantastic. That's awesome. So not only did you get a cert out of it that you were really proud of, but you also wrote a book that you're really proud of.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, I was proud of that. I remember those were good days, That's awesome. That was a nice high I rode for a couple weeks in there.
Only a couple weeks.
I'll never forget it. I took the test on like a Tuesday, and I went to work like the next day like nothing happened. Nobody cared.
God.
But it's just it's not like in the movies where there's like this ride off in the sunset and happily ever after. It's like, no, you just go back to work.
It should be.
So what was that first role with Cisco, and what drove you to Cisco?
So the job I was at was actually a great job. I decided to leave. I'm thinking, I have to think now. Why did I even leave? I wasn't really upset with it. I think it was just a matter of the opportunity presenting itself. Like, hey, I was working with the Cisco sales team at the customer. They're like, we really think you'd be a good person to have inside the company. And we'll work to open that job for you so you can stay here and support this same customer for a few more years. But rather than be here for 2 decades, you'll have an opportunity to do something else. And that's exactly how how the story went. So I started working there in early 16, and by late 19, I was on my way out. Before that, I don't remember what year it was, but a couple of years later, I was on my way out, and timing worked out okay. So my first role, to answer your question more directly, I was a network consulting engineer. I used to, an NCE, if you've seen that term. They changed all the names now. I think it's just consulting engineer now. But I came in at that level and worked on site with the customer I used to work for. On site, I sat in the same chair.
That's incredible.
I kept the same laptop. Yeah, so I managed to just switch badges. Obviously, things changed a little bit. I wasn't allowed in certain meetings anymore, and some people treated me a little bit differently, which was fine. But for the most part, I did similar work for them, just under the Cisco umbrella. Did that for a few more years there, and that allowed me to have a smooth transition out while also not leaving my customer in the lurch. So it worked out okay. So
you got your CCIEs before going to Cisco. Why did you decide to pursue the CCIEs and the CCDE?
Well, so just the timing was a little bit weird. So the CCIE route switch I definitely got before Cisco. The service provider, if you remember, I had to publish the book before I started at Cisco. That same December that I left my old company was the same December I finished the book. So that CCIE actually happened in my first couple months of being employed at Cisco. All the studying happened the year before, but so that one happened kind of right at the junction point. The reason I went for it's almost like joining the Marines, where, looking back at my reasons for doing it, they're a little bit unclear, but I just I thought that having it would not only be useful for my career, but I knew that the journey would be helpful. And having that expertise would open up opportunities for me. And plus, I enjoyed doing the work a lot. So, looking at it from it wasn't purely let me get my digits so I always have a high paying job. I've and you'll see even on Twitter, one thing I don't personally do is talk about how much money I make and how I'm chasing all these big jobs. That's just not my style. Again, I don't have anything against people who do that. That's just not my style. Because I don't chase money. The money looks for me because my skill sets will command the money. I don't need to go and beg for it. That's just my take. And by having those skills, people will want to bring you into the company and they'll want to assign you to their projects. And that is what makes you attractive from a technical perspective. It's not just the certifications, but it's the expectation that you have the knowledge entailed from those certifications. And I think this is where my general strategy and my personal strategy around my body of work, it's all mutually supporting. That's why I'm very careful. And I talked about this. I saw Eric Cho is in the comments there. I talked about this a little bit on his podcast a few months back, is that I'm very deliberate on the things that I do and don't do. You'll never see me sell. And again, this is not, I'm going to be completely clear. I'm not knocking people who do this, but you won't see me selling t-shirts and coffee mugs because that's completely orthogonal with the brand I'm trying to build. So when people see me, I want them to think high functioning expert that should not be trifled with. Like that's the brand that I want for myself. Not like in a jerk kind of way, but in a way where my influence comes from my technical ability, my writing skills, and my content creation, not so much from my engagement, my personality type things. I like to be personable and helpful, but it's not like my primary purpose in the community. So that's why, I guard that very, very closely.
Well, I love that about you, Nick. And I want to point out to anyone who hasn't visited your website yet that it is like pure information. There's no bullshit, no frills. I mean, you even say why, right? Like you want it to be as accessible as possible. And that I think is amazing. I didn't know that until I actually was looking for I was looking for some information and I found it on your website and it was just like, I love that approach because I've never seen it from anyone before. And the fact that you specifically want your stuff to be accessible and you're all about the knowledge, that's great because that's the opposite basically of gatekeeping. And I know that's kind of a buzzword and everything right now, but I mean, you making your stuff accessible and your knowledge accessible is quite possibly like the best thing that you can do for, the networking community. And that's wonderful that you do that.
Yeah. And I try to, and the way I look at it is, everything, and this is, I had this conversation with Eric too. Everything that's part of your personal brand and your reputation, it has to be consistent. You have to be ideologically consistent. And I'm not saying that you have to be like me. That's not what I said, but you just need to be consistent. If your thing is no frills, technical content, then everything that you do should support that goal. And anything you do that doesn't support that goal is waste, and it just gets in the way. But not everyone, other people are going to have different goals. They might be more about community engagement, or they might be more about everything from, engaging racial minorities or women. Like I support all that stuff. But if you're going to do those things, just make sure that the specific actions that you're taking on social media, in your business, in your work environment, all mutually support that point. Because it's like we say in relationships, mixed messaging. That's like the worst thing you can do. Either give me closure and say that you don't want to be with me anymore, or do the opposite. But the mixed messaging can confuse the people who are in your sphere of influence, and they can leave them confused about what is this person really doing? Like when I think of topic X, who comes into my mind first? And the way I look at myself is when I need to learn about developing a complex architecture, where can I find resources and documentation? Who's the guy for that? And honestly, the answer right now is probably Ivan Popelniak, because he's just great. Like he's, and I acknowledge that. He's been around forever, and his body of work is just extraordinary. I want to be up there like that at some point. I might be another decade or two, but my point is that when people think about those kinds of things, I want to be one of the first people in their mind. And the same can be true for, any topic, whether it's a social effort or a technical effort or a business effort. You just need to be consistent with your strategy and be deliberate to the point where it almost seems repetitive. It's like the most important thing.
Love it. We all contribute in different ways, right? And being consistent. Yeah. I love that principle. It makes
that was exactly the point I made on Eric's podcast. I contrasted myself with Network Chuck, who I love. His value proposition and the things that he does are completely different than mine, but they're all aligned.
So valuable.
When you want a certain kind of content, or you think about a certain thing, or you see a certain logo or an image, or you see something that is aligned with what he does, he's the first thing that comes in your mind. Because what he's selling, and maybe that's not the right word, but what he's offering is very different. But it's also very clear. Like, I don't think there's any confusion on what Network Chuck does. And I think that's true for a lot of people out there. And I think just Network Chuck has the longevity of having been doing what he's doing for so long that he's had time to refine it and grow that market penetration. Whereas other people who I think are towards the beginning of their journey, that clarity isn't quite there yet. And that's okay. Because when you start off and you build your strategy and you identify the core values and the manner in which you will provide value to everyone else, it's never going to be clear. I wrote my first one in 2018, which was 2 years after I published my first book. So clearly I was producing things long before I had even thought about what the strategy would be. But it started to become apparent to me that if I were going to start doing live courses and Pluralsight contracts and writing more books and doing webinars and going on podcasts, I needed to be a little more deliberate about how I was going to present myself. Because otherwise you could just go and do every willy-nilly thing, and then you would just end up confusing, like, okay, what does this guy do? Okay, he writes a white paper once in a while, and then he sells hoodies, and then he goes and, advocates for a social cause, and then he does this other thing. Like, what is it? I don't even understand. Now, my opinion is that you can do those different things. They just need to be mutually supporting. And I haven't really found a way to tie in merchandise with the work that I do. And I don't think I ever will. If I do find a way, then great, but I don't think I will. So I'm not just going to force different items into my brand because other people are doing them or because it's going to put another $17 into my bank account every month. Don't go down that road. It's a dangerous road. The money will come to you if the market thinks you're worth it. There's a reason I don't talk about money. I'll leave it at that.
It's very fascinating how you talk about that. It's very different from what we see, especially on social media. There are a ton of, for lack of a better word, influencers, right, out there who do kind of this. It's the same playbook, right? And it's what you're saying, like, sell the hoodies and t-shirts or whatever. We've got some flash. We talk about money. You don't often see somebody with the approach that you have. And that's refreshing. It's great.
Yeah, that was...
Yeah, and I'm not like against any of that stuff. I just, again, I like to be extremely clear on this because I think some people may take this as an attack. It's not. It's just, if you're going to be an influencer, you need to just be laser focused on who you're trying to influence, why you're trying to influence them, what your end state is going to be, and why people should think of you first on that particular topic. That's it. Like, if you can answer those questions definitively and execute against those decisions, then you're going to do well. But if you have a general, like, I want to influence everyone and I want it to, like, you're going to hurt. You need to be very specific on the kind of people and the kind of things that you deliver.
Yeah, I think that self-awareness highlight was one of the biggest takeaways I got from the episode you did on Eric Cho's podcast. And you had brought up an example of YouTube. Like, you had tried the YouTube thing for a little while. You found out that it really wasn't your thing, and you didn't try to force it. You said, okay, this isn't the medium that I want to use at least a whole lot to produce content. And you focused on something else that you were willing to be strong in. And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I haven't, I did a short video in late September and I haven't done anything since. Because again, it's so hard for me to compete in that space. You look at some of the, you guys know how the algorithm works. The thumbnail of the, you got to have the big block letters, the weird facial reaction, like that's required. And that's okay. And I'm not mad about that. Like, I just can't.
resent it. I resent it. I'll just say that publicly. I resent the face that you have to have on you.
Hold on. She says that after she knows the thumbnail that Dan chose for Andy's episode last week.
And I got to tell you, that's one of the best performing ones so far.
I mean, that's okay. And that's okay. Like, I'm not mad about it. You just need to, it's like I said on his podcast, YouTube is television. And when you're a TV guy or girl, there's certain things you need to do to do audience capture. And that's just, it's hard for me and it's not authentic. So I just don't want to do that. And, you guys talked about Pluralsight earlier. The reason that I was attracted to Pluralsight over, the other companies that could have gone with is because not only do they have really high audiovisual standards, but they're also very meticulous about the length of courses, the length of each clip, the amount of pause between every sentence. Like all that stuff is carefully measured. And if you're not compliant, you will be asked to make corrections. Wow. So if you watch one of my Pluralsight courses, you'll notice the exact timing between sentences is almost identical to the millisecond. The beginning and the end of the clip. The volume is a steady neg 6 to neg 12 dB. Typically 9 is the average there. Very, very consistent, because I want people to see this is what professional grade training looks like. And that's why the courses, you won't see a lot of speculation. It's very to the point technical training with complex demos and labs. Because who am I targeting? Busy professionals who want immediate technical knowledge without the fluff. That's consistent with my website. It's consistent with my bearing and my poise. It's consistent with everything I say on social media. And it's consistent with how I operate at my day job. All those things have to mutually support one another.
Love it. Love it.
Nick, you do so much. And I know I've seen a few people ask this in the Patreon chat here. So what is your process? How do you manage all of these projects, personal, work-related, family-related, and otherwise? How do you do it? Andy's not here right now, so I'm just going to ask the question. How do you do it?
Yeah. Again, I said this on Eric's podcast, but I do like to do the most important things first in the morning. So when I wake up, don't touch your phone. I hit the button to see what time it is, and then it goes back down. I don't, it's no Twitter, nothing like that. I get up, and then, after doing a basic routine, I'll get to work on whatever's the most important thing. And I try to do the most cognitively difficult things right away when you're fresh. So, I might do some recording and a little bit of editing, but typically I'll do the recording first and the editing later, because editing is kind of mindless. If you've ever done it, it's time consuming. It's not hard. It's just time consuming. You do need a little bit of focus, but it's not that bad. The much harder thing to do is design labs, troubleshoot labs, writing the white papers. That's very cognitively difficult. Those are the kinds of things I'll do first. And then other projects through the day, based on their difficulty level, will get done in order. In terms of the, tracking the projects, I just use a simple Kanban board with up to 2 tasks at once. I never work on more than 2 things at once ever. That's how you end up starting 6 projects and finishing 0. So I only work on 2 things at once. Obviously, my work and personal projects are separate. I don't let those mingle, because, if I'm working on 2 personal projects, I'm not going to tell my boss, hey, I can't work for Cisco right now. Sorry. That's not how it works. But I do keep separate boards for both jobs. That allows me to stay focused. And it also pushes me and says, I really want to start, a good example over the summer. I started writing my newest white paper on IPTV, which just published a few weeks back. I started it in July, and I really wanted to start because I had all these ideas, and I was like, everyone's excited at the beginning of anything, right? So I was like, I'm ready to go, but I need to finish these other things first. I need to update these Postman collections. I need to go and do this maintenance on my website, and my CI pipeline is failing for my political polling project from last year. I need to fix that. So I had to do I didn't have to do any of that. But I'm a believer that if you're going to publish something, you need to maintain it. Because if your website is just a graveyard of old stuff, you don't get credit for that. It's like, that's just you saying I used to be good. Like, no. You got to keep that stuff up to date if you're going to keep it public. So I had to do all that first. And then the reward for doing all that cleanup is I get to start the fun stuff. And then I work on that for a few months, get that buttoned up, send it off to peer review for a few months, got the results back around Christmas. Made the changes over break, and then published it in early January. So things like that, and that, once it was out for peer review, I marked it as done enough, to work on something else. But doing those things in order lets you focus. And it's been written about a lot. I'm not the first guy to figure this out, but focus on a smaller number of things. And if you do that, I can guarantee that you'll finish those things sooner. And when you're halfway through a journey that seems impossible, don't allow yourself to chase the new shiny thing until you finish what you were doing. That's so important, but it's also really mentally difficult to do. But you got to do that. And if you do that, you'll end up not only finishing the thing you were working on, but also the gift of being able to start the new thing that excites you. Because if you just abandon things halfway, that doesn't, to my opinion, that doesn't really count for much. It actually, in my opinion, it speaks more negatively about you than positively, because it's really easy to jump ship. It's really easy to start something new when you're excited, and everyone's excited for you. Go on Twitter and have someone announce that they're doing something new. You'll get more likes than anything. Mm-hmm. And I'm not against celebrating people doing new hard things, but there should also be an expectation that people finish those things. I tell people all the time, be a finisher, not a starter, because one is hard and one is easy. So it's very important to keep that in mind.
I feel called out.
I love that advice.
Okay. That actually wasn't. No,
I know.
That's not
I know.
clearly not. Yeah,
totally a joke. But I'm feeling it. You're right. It's a very good philosophy to have, because you're right. If you don't finish something, then what'd you do it for?
Right.
But like we like to say, it's all about the journey.
There we go.
That's right. That's right. I had to sneak that in there. I love it. So the DevNet Expert has come out in recent months. Is that anything that you have interest in putting on your to-do list?
A moderate interest. One of the benefits of being at Cisco is that I can take that test for free, including travel.
Oh,
so wow. So I'm going to do that almost certainly. I know what it takes to pass these tests, and it's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of at the point now where I don't really have a whole lot more to prove. I've gotten 3, I've written books, I've done tons of training on DevNet. I've passed 6 out of the 10 tests already. I could get the DevNet Expert. It'd be another feather in a cap kind of thing. I might do it. The time commitment is hard. And just with my recent surgery and other physical issues and my age, the physical, back then it wasn't that big of a deal, but, my hands are starting to hurt. Is it really worth it? In order to just to put it into perspective, when I say that a CCIE takes, 8 to 12 months, this isn't, just casual studying, reading books and going on Twitter. It's hardcore water cooled speed typing. Like, it's a lot, millions of characters. It's hard on your body. It's hard on your back. It's hard on your eyes. It's just hard. And I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty beat up from a life in the military to various other injuries. And I look pretty decent, but it takes a lot of effort. And I'm not sure that I want to sacrifice any more of my health. That's really the simplest way to put it. I'll probably take the test just because why not? But putting forth the 30 hours a week, which is 20 minimum, to study for this test and just be banging on a keyboard for that amount of time and struggling through it, I'm not sure I want to do that, to be honest. I've done it 3 times. I know what it takes. I know it's hard.
Fair.
Do I really need a 4th? What's the 4th going to give me? So still kind of on the fence about that.
Yeah. We had a great question in the Patreon chat. What does Nick Russo do to unwind and relax?
That's a hard question, especially recently, because relaxing has been tough past couple months. Generally speaking, here's what I've been doing. I do a lot of walking now. Now that, my choice of exercises has been reduced quite a bit. So I do a lot of walking, which is nice. It's hard to say whether playing games like chess or Risk are relaxing, because those games can be extremely stressful sometimes. But I do play those games, which is cool. Sometimes I play a MUD. It's called Materia Magica. Imagine Dungeons and Dragons except over Telnet. So kind of like that. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. I used to play.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool game. Just check it out. It's free. So I play that once in a while. It's one of those things where it's really easy to get sucked into. So I police myself, towards the end of the night, I might play for 20, 30 minutes or so. And that's the end of it. Other than that, all the stock politician answers, hanging out with family, blah, blah, blah. Those all apply too.
Very cool. Very cool.
Sorry, that brought me back to old school days. MUDs are old school, man. That's awesome. I've never heard anyone else say I know there are people out there.
Let me just tell you why I like MUDs.
Yeah.
Because again, you might not believe it, but me liking MUDs over other games is completely consistent with the rest of my whole brand. Let me explain why.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So you've seen me on Twitter complaining that people need to read more. And maybe complaining is the wrong word, but I always encourage people to read more. When I think about, people having opinions on things they don't know about, and then they go and listen to, let's just say, some alternative media on that topic. I'm like, why would you do that when you could just read a book or lots of books from different perspectives and actually get something a little more refined? So I do a lot of reading on a whole bunch of diverse topics. My past couple books, one was on, if I go back like 5 books, was on I Am Malala, the Pakistani girl who was shot by the Taliban. The Anatomy of Fascism, a Napoleon biography. I'm currently reading a U.S. Ulysses S. Grant biography. These are a variety of writers from different countries, some of them with on a personal level, some with conservative opinions, some with liberal opinions. But oftentimes when you read history books, those opinions don't really manifest themselves in obnoxious ways. And I think it's useful to keep in mind that professional historians and others do a really good job of presenting their research in a professional way. And that's why I think you should always focus on those books first. So anyway, aside from that, I do a ton of reading. And even when I read fiction, which I do, I like to read because you are allowing your mind to visualize what's in the book, rather than have someone prescribe it to you in a picture. And if you think about MUDs, it's the same thing. You're playing a fantasy game, you're walking into rooms, there's a text description of the room, and then you get to imagine what it looks like. There's no artwork. And I like that because it's consistent. And it allows me to think about what am I actually seeing, rather than somebody giving me the picture in their mind. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't want to live your dream. I want to visualize it for myself. So that's why I like to play MUDs.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
For anyone might be listening who doesn't know what a MUD is, I'm not really sure how many people may or may not, but it's a multi-user dungeon is what it stands for.
Okay.
I didn't actually even know that. I just looked it up, but it's a text-based game. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I used to play it. I used to play this game back in 2003, and I stopped for 18 years, and I just started over Thanksgiving.
What's it called?
So it's like, so I haven't played in a long time. And some of the people I knew back then when we were 15 are in their 30s with families now. So kind of like me. So it's kind of interesting that some people actually been playing for that long. But yeah, it's cool. My point is that if you do things that are, again, this ties into the whole thing is, the reason I like to read is because it frees me and allows me to visualize things the way I want to visualize them. And the same thing is for MUDs. And yes, I realize like chess and Risk are a little bit different. But at the same time, it's, I'm not really into, modern video games and stuff. They're a little bit too, they don't leave anything to the imagination. And that's a little bit boring to me. But enough on that.
I'm going to have to check that out. That sounds like a lot of fun. Never heard of it until now.
You should.
Hey, A1 fans, AJ here to remind you about NordVPN.com. NordVPN will help secure you wherever you go. I use NordVPN on all of my personal devices. Whenever I'm out and about, I just go into the NordVPN app, hit Quick Connect, and away I go. Nice and secure. Don't have to worry about prying eyes, anybody looking at my connection. If I choose to go work from a coffee shop locally, or even while I'm traveling, if I bring my personal devices, I will use NordVPN to help keep things safe and secure. I'm using NordVPN right now, and there's no degradation in my signal. Everything looks good when you guys watch us on the live streams. So I can't say enough good things about NordVPN. They have some great additional services included with their VPN product. They'll scour the dark web for your credentials and see if they've been involved in any sort of hacks or anything. And then if they have, they'll let you know, and you can go change your passwords and do whatever you need to do to help keep yourself safe and secure. They also have a mode that will block any websites or ads known to possess malware, and they just have general ad blocking anyway, because who wants ads? As I record an ad. Anyway, if you want NordVPN, and you do, go to nordvpn.com/TAONE for the art of network engineering, and you can get a really great deal, 73% off 2 years plus 4 months free. So again, that's 73% off 2 years plus 4 months free of NordVPN. If you forget that URL, just go to nordvpn.com. At checkout, you can use the promo code TAONE for the art of network engineering, and we appreciate your support as well as NordVPN support of the Art of Network Engineering podcast. Now back to the show. Nick, we have a lot of people that are trying to break in to a tech career, or they're early on in career. So I would love to get your take on, any advice you might have for somebody starting out. How would you kind of direct them to get going?
I would say, let me think about this carefully. So my initial, let me, just to recap what I did. I got out of the military. I bought a CCNA book, studied it every day, did the labs from it, and I kind of improved my skills. Now, this was in 2011. Twitter had been out for 5 years, but it wasn't really huge back then. So there wasn't like a place where you could go online every day and talk about what you studied. Mm-hmm. My recommendation is for people who are really new, like you're new to the point where you have almost no skills and you're trying to enter tech from outside of it. First of all, you should probably be watching someone like Network Chuck, because I think he does a good job of covering the social and transitory aspects of that. And it's not just Chuck. There's other people who do a good job too. I'm not trying to, trying to say only he does. But more broadly, I would say you need to be consistent with your studies. You need to study every single day. I know there's, the lab every day, Duan, I think his name is. Some people have entire brands around that concept, and that's great. But you got to live that concept, though. It can't just be a slogan. Every single day for at least 30 minutes. It's just like if you're trying to learn a musical instrument, or if you're trying to exercise, doing a really hard 3-hour workout once every Saturday is going to be far less effective than 30 hours every day or 5 times a week or whatever. Same idea with studying. Be consistent every day, a little bit every day, is going to have a much bigger impact overall. So you have to be consistent with it. And if that means making other sacrifices and saying, I'm going to have to, not watch this sitcom or whatever, then you have to make those sacrifices, at least initially, to get your knowledge up to a point where you're able to get a job and be a functioning individual at that job. So be consistent, study every day. That's, basically what it comes down to. Don't think that you can batch everything into a marathon cram session on Sunday like you did in college. Because in college, the goal, if you were less serious about it, you're trying to pass a test, and that's fine. But the difference, though, is that you're going to get a degree at the end of it. But there's no guarantee you're going to pass your Cisco test, or there's no guarantee you're going to get that job. There's not necessarily a light at the end of that tunnel. It's much more nebulous. So be consistent, study every day. I still
Nick,
do.
I really like that you brought up 30 minutes a day, because I think a lot of people, when they think about studying, they try to cram hours of studying in every day. So is there something about the 30 minutes why you recommend just 30 minutes a day, or at least 30 minutes a day?
Yeah. So if, there's a method called the Pomodoro method where, people will set a 25-minute timer with a 5-minute break. And then they'll do those iterations to be very focused for that short time and then step away. Because the way we function is we typically can't stay focused on a difficult task for more than 30 or 45 minutes or so. Mm-hmm. So my take is that focus hard for those 30 minutes and then stop. And then go and do something else before it starts to feel like a chore. It's kind of like being in the gym where, you're feeling good for the first, 10, 20, 30 minutes, but then towards the end of it, mentally, you're coming up on the end of it because you're starting to run out of gas, and you might have a harder time putting in full effort at that point. And then it starts to feel like a chore. And then over time, you start going to the gym less and less. We see this is I'm using the gym as an example just because it's relatable. But the same thing happens with studying. 30 minutes a day is, in my opinion, very easily achievable. I think most people can find a way to carve out 30 minutes a day without making huge sacrifices to their existing commitments. And it is prevention against burnout. Now, if you're studying for a CCIE, 30 minutes a day is nowhere near adequate. You need about 7 times that much. And that's not an exaggeration. On average, of course, you won't be able to do 4 hours every day, but you need 20 or 30 hours a week. But if you said getting started in tech, you have to build your tolerance up to it, just like in the gym. You're not going to show up in the gym completely untrained for 3 hours and do some crazy workout. You're going to go for 30 minutes and be sore for a week because you haven't done push-ups in a year, kind of thing. So it's the same idea with tech. Start small, but be consistent every day. That's going to have, like I said, it's going to have a way bigger impact than if you batched all that time into 1 3-hour session on Sunday.
I love it. Boy, Nick, is there anything that we didn't ask you that we should have, or is there anything that you want to share with us that we haven't covered yet?
No, I mean, some advice I give, again, I think I might have said this on Eric's podcast and elsewhere, but if you have some technical skills to do something, and it also happens that there's a hobby of yours that can benefit from that skill. So a good example, some people like sports, some people like music. If you like those things and you're also in tech, let's say you're me, I don't like sports, but let's pretend that I did. I might go and write some code, to pull down all the stats from a fantasy football team, or, track something in the sports world by going to a website, writing interfacing with a, Major League Baseball's API, or just, screen scraping the HTML text and, whatever. Build something that you think is cool and that supports your hobbies, because not only are you going to get some experience in writing software or doing whatever, but it's also going to serve some useful purpose for you. So 2 examples. I have more than 2, but back in 2020, once a day, what I would do is I would check the political polling because I like the science of that. And what I wanted to do is I wanted a quick aggregated way to see all the polling for federal and state races. So I wrote a serverless application with AWS Lambda to do that, which would pull down the polling and it would fit on one smartphone screen. So I'd go to the link, the server I set up for it. I'd go immediately see everything, highlighted with the differences, who was winning, color coded. And if I wanted to drill in, I could click each race and it would pull up all the details of it. But most of the time I could spend 2 seconds, I could look at the race and I could put my phone away. So now I wouldn't have to spend 10 minutes on the laptop looking at the data. I could get the results faster. And I learned a lot about Lambda at the same time. But that was interesting to me personally. But I was able to leverage my technical skills to make that better. Recently for the mud we were just talking about, this is a game that has thousands of items. And, there's food items in it. There's like 500. And the different items have different capabilities that they give you. They make you run faster or hit harder or whatever. And what I did is I put on my website, it's hidden, you all can't see it, but I have it, of all the foods in the game and their benefits. So if I'm going to go do something hard, or I'm going to go fight some certain boss or do whatever, I can go there and I can Control F in the browser, find out which foods give me the capabilities I need, click the link and go find out where to get them.
Brilliant.
So it's stupid. It's kind of silly, right? But it took me 2 hours to write that Python script and then publish an HTML to my website that I can reference to make it easier for me. Saves me keystrokes when I'm playing and makes the game more enjoyable. And because I only play for I don't have a lot of time to play these games. So because I only have a short time, I want to make sure that I can find that information quickly. So again, it doesn't have to be purely productive. You don't only have to be mapping out and solving problems that are directly related to enterprise network automation. Go write a sports thing. Go do do something for a game you like to play, whatever. I always encourage people to do that because not only will you gain experience, but you'll be solving a problem useful to you. And you'll walk away from it thinking, I was able to tie in my interests in a new way that no one had done before. So I always recommend people do that.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, you gotta have some skin in the game, right? And if you can't find that in the job portion of it or the professional portion of it to find something to attach to learn to, then finding it in a personal interest will definitely get you there. That's fantastic advice.
Yeah, find a personal problem that would benefit from, like, especially on the automation topic or software. Find a personal problem that you think would be that you have the skills to solve, and just toy around with it. It's a lot easier to focus on that. And this is, like the 100 Days of Code challenge. Like, a lot of people did that. I have zero interest in that. Not because I don't like doing code challenges, but to me, they're just abstract. They're just like, oh, here's this code challenge that someone else thought was cool. Do you want to solve it? It's like, no. I got a million other ideas in my head that are way more interesting than that. But that's just my opinion, right? I'm not saying 100 Days of Code is bad or that everyone that does it is stupid. That's not what I said. Yeah. Only that if you find something that's interesting to you, I can guarantee not only will you do a better job with it, but it won't feel like work, because you'll feel like you're building something that helps you. Like, I saved myself time with those two things I just described. I did myself a favor, and I just happened to learn something from it, rather than just do a code challenge that gets thrown away. But there's no value from that.
And the implication there is also that, like, the ways that the methods everyone else is using to learn a thing don't have to be the methods you use. Right.
Yep. Just like we talked about the CCIE journeys, 3 completely different strategies, one of which was total hermit isolation mode. That's fine too. You don't have to use the same methods as everyone else. Other people have strategies. I have prescriptive study plans for certain tests that some people like. You can do a little bit of picky, choosy selection. That's fine. But some people like having the prescription, just like my first CCIE, and that's fine too. Allowing people to choose the strategy that works for them. And again, the word works is doing, it's saying a lot, because, when I say something that works for you, it's not pick what's easiest. It's pick what's most effective.
Yeah, I think a lot of people choose the path of least resistance. They might feel like they're getting work done, but they're just checking, modules off a list or something like that. They're not actually studying.
I think everyone's done that. I've done that. It's so easy to do that, and it's easy to tune out, especially when there's a way to track progress that way. So what I've recently started doing is, when I'm watching courses, I make sure to not check things. And it sounds kind of weird, but just mentally for me, if I'm watching a video course and putting a check on it, that makes you feel like you've accomplished something. But I haven't accomplished a damn thing. I'm sitting here watching a video. I haven't done anything. I don't deserve that check mark. So I personally don't like to mark it as done. And I realize that marking it as done tells you where you left off, and that's fine. I just write down on a notepad where I left off and continue, because I don't want to feel like I'm making progress, because I'm actually not. I don't make progress until I pass the test, or I don't make progress until I write the white paper or whatever. That's more of a mental thing for me personally. Check marks mean success, and I don't deserve check marks for watching a video from someone else. It's just, again, my opinion on that. I don't judge people who do, but for me, I don't want to feel like, again, path of least resistance. Hey, if I just plow through this course and check everything off, I'll feel like I did something. I mean, maybe you did, but those check marks are not an indication of you learning anything. They're certainly not an indication that you are able to apply those skills. That would come from doing a lab or applying it in some other way.
Speaking of studying, if I can plug your website again, Nick, I noticed that you have study plans actually published on there for certain exams, and that's awesome. I imagine that you get a lot of people asking you for study plans. I've noticed that people will tend to message more visible people in network engineering or whatever, tech discipline that they're interested in, and just say, hey, can you teach me how to get this exam, or give me study materials or whatever. And it's kind of it can be an annoying thing if you get those messages a lot. But I think it's great. I don't have study plans, out there. I just do whatever I can. But for you to have something out there, hey, just go to my website. Here it is for anybody listening. If you want to know what, Nick, I assume how he recommends studying, or at least how you, have used study plans, they're up there on his website. They're already there. So
yeah. And again, those are all very strategic. If you look at those plans, there's, my own Pluralsight courses peppered in with a bunch of other stuff. They're all very low cost for a reason. Basically, Pluralsight's the only thing you have to have. All the other things are either free or part of it. So rather than make you go and spend $500 on books, you can spend $30 a month instead and get through it in a month or two. So very cheap. They all tie in with the strategy. They tie in other resources. They tie in some of my other free products. The idea between them is like, some people like guided learning. I like guided. I mean, who doesn't? Right? It can be really useful. To not have guided learning is really difficult sometimes. So by having those plans, it helps enable more people to earn the certifications, because there are a lot of people who I think are technically skilled and motivated who just need to be led in the right direction. And that's easily done with a plan that, like the ones I have. Like for me to, yes, it took some time to put the plans together, record it and do the video, but that's nowhere near the time it's going to take someone else to actually execute the plan and learn and do all the work. So it's not like the people following the plan are lazy, far from it. They just needed some guidance on what to do and in what sequence from someone who had already walked that path. And that's what the plan is for.
Yeah, as someone who has a lot of trouble being structured in my studying, thank you for doing that.
I think that's one thing that we've seen in this industry, right? If you look over the past 10 years, we've gone from a place that was I can't find any content to learn how to name anything, right? And now we're at a point where there's so much content, it can be overwhelming and you don't know where to start. So I certainly appreciate the study plans that you put out, as I know many others have. So it is nice to have a learning path and to be guided.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a huge explosion of it, and I mean the problem is that the word content means anything. Yeah, I mean anyone who produces anything is a content creator, right? And I'm not a gatekeeper on the term content creator. I'm not over here saying that unless you do XYZ, you don't get to call yourself that. That's not that's not what I'm saying. It's only that it can be really hard to know what you're going after. Like again, Network Chuck, great example. When you go to Network Chuck, you're getting a very specific thing, like McDonald's. And I'm not saying Network Chuck is like McDonald's. I'm just saying you go to McDonald's, no matter where you are in the world with, a few, cultural differences, you're going to get the same experience.
Right.
And that's the power of branding. And when you have that brand and people know when they need a certain very specific thing, whether it's a technically specific thing. So if I need Kubernetes, I know where to go. Nigel Poulton. If I need Terraform, where do I go? Ned Bellavance. I just know those things because those are people I trust on those technologies that have courses on Pluralsight that are great. But when but sometimes it's not just a point technology, but it's rather who can give me, in my case, the free resources, the study plans, the white papers, I do that. But it could also be more of how can I get, career guidance or resume reviews. Those are things I don't do. Other people do those things. And other people will, again, comes back to who's the first person you think of for those things. So if I said, if all of you wanted your resumes reviewed, who would you go to? You don't have to answer it, but just in your mind, think about that. And if all three of you thought of the same person, that person is doing great.
Yeah.
I doubt that you did, but if you did, that would have been, that would be complete success for that one person, or at least a very good indication of it. And, when lots of people have content, everyone's striving to be recognized somehow, but that recognition has to be consistent with your overall brand and has to be authentic. I've said it a million times. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be niche. You don't only have to be really good at one thing. You can be broad, but you also have to be good enough at what you do and consistent enough. If you want to have very wide breadth, you need to be consistent with that, and it needs to be part of your overall brand rather than just throwing punches in the dark, hoping something lands and hoping someone notices you. I mean, there's a name for that. It's called shitposting. But there's being able to do a better job of.
All right, now you're calling me
Here
out.
we go.
Yeah, that was.
All right.
No.
Shots fired.
No, I think I've said it I've said it enough now that where people are kind of getting the point is you want to be someone that, so you're absolutely right. Lexi said, people come to me asking for study plans all the time. Most of the time I'm able to point them to something that I have. oftentimes they'll give me requests. They'll say, hey, I see you have a study plan for X and Y. Can you give me one for Z? The answer is usually no, because I'm not just going to make a study plan. I will never make study plans on technologies that I'm not really good at. I think that's just unfair, personally. Not only would I never trust anyone who does that, but I think it would cheapen my personal brand. Because, people ask me, hey, what about data centers? Like, I'm not a data center guy. Like, I'm okay with it, but there's no world in which I would ever train data center stuff. Like, unless I was unless I spent like a year on it and nothing else, I just wouldn't do that. It would not be fair to me or the viewers or anyone else. So you have to be realistic about what people view you as, and not just blindly giving people what they want. Because if I made a data center study plan, it would almost certainly be worse than everything else. Now, what does that say about me? And how are people going to view the rest of my content? Because people who only see that data center plan are going to judge everything else I do based on that one experience. Mm-hmm. And that's completely valid. Like, I am not complaining about being judged for my words or my actions. That's how I want to be judged, right? Those are the things that should govern how people view me. So I want to make sure that if I want to be judged based on those things, then those things need to be absolutely perfect by my standards. Because if they're not, first impressions matter. And data center people don't tend to follow me because I don't talk about that. But if I published a data center plan tomorrow, a bunch of new data center people who don't know me are going to see it. They're going to be like, this is okay, but not great. And they're going to be like, Nick Russo is not the first guy in my mind when I think about IT training anymore. So now that's not helpful. That's not helpful for anyone. And my first impressions on a bunch of people who otherwise didn't have an opinion of me now may have a somewhat negative one.
You're talking about having integrity with the content that you post. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I'm not going to start telling people how to learn ACI. Like, I barely know it myself. So.
Oh, Nick, this has been such a fun conversation. I hate to wrap it up, but I think we're headed in that direction. In part, it's been a fun conversation because we've gotten some great questions from our Patreon folks watching the live stream tonight. If you're interested in being a Patreon supporter of the Art of Network Engineering, you can go to patreon.com/artofneteng. We thank all of our Patreons for their support of what we do here. Nick, where can people find you if they want to continue to follow you after they're done listening to this podcast?
Yep. So my website is really easy. It's njrusmc.net. You'll know it's mine because it's just like a 1994 HTML page, super basic. You can find me on Twitter, Nick Russo 42518. If you can't remember that, just go to the website, click on the About page, and then you'll have links to my Twitter, my LinkedIn, and my GitHub, and also a link that you can click to send me an email. So really easy to contact me on all those different networks.
Fantastic. We will put a link to your website and your Twitter handle in our show notes for this episode. So you can go back to your podcatcher, scroll down to the bottom to the show notes, and tap follow Nick right away. Nick, thank you so much for your time this evening. This has been such a fun conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll definitely have you back for a future episode so we can talk a little bit deeper about the technologies you do specialize in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And we'll see you next week on another episode of the Art of Network Engineering podcast.
Hey, y'all. This is Lexi. If you vibe with what you heard us talking about today, we'd love for you to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcatcher. Also, go ahead and hit that bell icon to make sure you're notified of all our future episodes right when they come out. If you want to hear what we're talking about when we're not on the podcast, you can totally follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Art of NetEng. That's Art of NetEng. You can also find a bunch more info about us and the podcast at artofnetworkengineering.com. Thanks for listening.